Okay, everybody. Hello, Amy Lykover here. I and the rest of our steering committee members who are with us this evening, and we have a lot of competition, as you know. We have meetings, other meetings that are planned, and we have the baseball game between San Francisco and LA. But we're here, and this is going to be recorded, and we'll probably put it on our website. So, welcome at this cool time of year. I want to just remind you what this meeting is about. And we're so pleased that Barry Miller has joined us. This was a long time in planning. We started really a long time ago. I want to say in the spring almost. He needed to find the right moment when he actually could present. And you know what he's going to be talking about. And we're very grateful that we get a sneak preview before this is even presented, I think, to the council. Am I right at that?
So sort of, yeah, I'll explain a little bit why it's a sneak preview in a minute. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anyway, let's see. Some more people are coming. So can you guys see that when I go to the waiting room?
No.
Oh, cool. That won't be recorded. Um, oh gosh, I wish someone else. Hey, Daniel, is he there? I'm going to have to keep doing this. So let me just breeze through here and remind you of the Fed mission, something that we on the steering committee take to heart and really work very hard to do. While we're just a volunteer organization, it's not easy. We all have limited time. We're all extremely involved in many things, including work. Um, I want you to know that this is something that we believe in and that guides us. These are the neighborhoods that belong to the Fed this year, and we're hoping to have more next year. Hello, Gail. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
This is our stalwart steering committee. And I just wanted to mention that coming up, we're going to have a forum about fixing the 101 North 580 East interchange. And what does the future hold for San Rafael and Larkspur? That's November 3rd. We're going to have representatives from Transportation Authority of Marin Tam, and also a sort of a community-based alternative to that. So this should be extraordinarily enlightening. We encourage you to calendar this.
All right. Can I ask a question? I'm a little confused. Are we hearing about the baseball game for an hour and then the meeting?
No. That was my way of luring you here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No, Richard, once he feels like adding, runs or something like that, he'll put that in chat. That's what I meant. So I'm really, really glad that you've taken time out of your busy schedules to join us. And because I know you share in our mission, and also that you put this date down, probably, most likely, surely will be by way of Zoom. But who knows? We just were chatting about a Christmas party and how that could conceivably be, in person with different criteria. So keep reading our emails that we send out. After the meeting, we're going to have a steering committee meeting, which you're welcome to stay from 8 to 8:30.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to turn this over to Barry Miller.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everyone. And I'm Barry Miller. I'm a consultant working with the city on the housing element update. We're going to talk to you a little bit about the project this evening. Before we do that, I wanted to introduce a couple of my colleagues with the city of San Rafael who are here tonight, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I see Jake and Alexis. I don't know if Ali is here, but I'll go to Jake first, and maybe then Alexis, you can let us know who you are. And actually, if you can talk a little bit about what your position involves, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Barry. I really appreciate it. And hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Noonan, and I'm the incoming housing manager for the city of San Rafael. So I just started last week, so I am brand new and still getting my feet on the ground. But it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy that I'm able to take a little moment and spend some time with all of you. And I really thank and applaud all of you for your interest in housing and the housing element for the city. My role as manager will be to work with Barry on not only just the document and the legislation and the policy, but then to achieve the housing that our community needs, so that people in the community know that as they age, that there's housing and options and choices that we can support people from all walks of life and through all walks of life in San Rafael, and that we're not only just meeting our state expectations and the expectations for the region, but we're really planning for the community. Now, with me, I want to introduce Alexis Kaptinian, and then I'll let her say a few things about herself. She is coming in as the city's housing analyst, so she's going to be helping me and helping Barry on the housing element, and then again on achieving the housing for the community. So, Alexis, would you like to say a few words or say hello to the group?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jacob. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Really glad to be here with all of you. As Jacob said, I am the new housing analyst as of about a month ago with the city of San Rafael. And I grew up in San Rafael, so this community is definitely close to home, close to heart for me. And I'm just really looking forward to working on this with Barry and Jacob, and glad that you're here to be involved and provide input, because that's a really key part of this process. And with that, I'll hand it back to Barry, I think.
Great, thank you. And we'll have some time at the end for questions, and would encourage Jake and Alexis to chime in as you know, we get to that point. What I'm going to do right now is share my screen and then walk through the presentation for this evening. And bear with me for a moment while I do that. And I may pause at a couple of points during the presentation, mostly to make sure you can still hear me, but also to see if there are questions or comments before we go all the way through this. So what we're going to do this evening is talk a little bit about the context for the housing element, kind of how we got here and why we're doing this. And then provide an overview of what is in the housing element and what we're required to do. Talk a little bit about some new state laws that are on everyone's mind that are driving some of what we're doing. And then lastly, go over the process and the schedule. And we do want to make this a little bit interactive to the extent we can. So please feel free to jump in if you have a question about something I'm saying or need clarification, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A.
Barry, I'm just going to ask everybody aside from Barry to mute themselves, and when you'd like to ask a question, as Barry said, please feel free to do that. Let me see, I don't know if you can, do you have a raise hand thing, guys? Or as far as I'm concerned, you could say excuse me and ask a question. I'm not, you know, I'm one of those teachers where you don't have to raise your hand to talk. So go ahead, Barry.
Great, thanks. So just a summary to provide some context. We've been adding a lot of jobs in the Bay Area in the last decade or so, and not adding housing at the rate that we need to sustain our economy. And here's some interesting statistics on this bar chart. What you're seeing is in the blue, the jobs added in each county, and in the orange, the number of housing units that have been added in each county. And then you see above each of those bars the ratio of jobs added to housing added. This is one of those instances where we're not proud to say we're number one, but we're number one. In other words, we have had the greatest discrepancy between the number of jobs we've added relative to the number of housing units. In the last 10 years, Marin County has added over 23,000 jobs and just about 1,100 housing units. So that provides a little bit of context. You can see that the number of jobs added is far greater in San Francisco and Santa Clara counties. They've been adding a little more housing, but still everyone is falling short to try to maintain a regional balance here. And when we think about this, often we think that it's just a tech boom, but in fact, the employment is growing at all sectors. And when you see those Google and Facebook jobs, you also have support service jobs and jobs in the lower income and the moderate income ranges that are also growing at a pretty fast clip. So here you can see that the greatest gap between housing production and jobs is actually in the lower end of the income scale. So we've been adding more above moderate income housing. This is regionally than low and moderate income housing. And this is kind of what it adds up to. These, and I apologize in advance for a lot of data and a lot of numbers. All of this will be online, and you can have a chance to dive into it a little more there. But this shows in the first column, these are different planning cycles that have been established by the state. This is the number of housing units that were identified as being needed by the state of California in the Bay Area during each of those periods to maintain supply and demand. And these are the number of housing units that were permitted. But what I want to call your attention to are the percentages, because what you can see here is that if you look at how much of the need for low and very low income housing has been produced, at least in the last few years, we're producing only 15% of what's been needed for very low and low income households relative to the targets that were set by the state of California. And again, we can come back to some of these numbers. That lack of supply and construction has contributed to the run-up in housing costs that we've seen. And these are the median home values according to Zillow for San Rafael. So the price has roughly doubled in 9 years. This is the price of a home in San Rafael, which was on median was $642,000 in 2012. It's now almost $1.3 million for the median home in San Rafael. So the appreciation has been extraordinary in the last 9 years. And one of the outcomes of that is that our service workers increasingly can't afford to live here anymore without paying exorbitant percentages of their income on rent. And you see in this table the average annual incomes for various employment categories and the percentage of income that would be required to afford a median priced apartment, which would be about median price in San Rafael is about $2,600 to $2,700. And for those who are earning, less than $50,000 a year, that's way more than half of your income that you're spending on rent for a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. So there are some benefits to having more housing choices in the community. Young families can find a home. If you're a young family in San Rafael, it's very difficult to purchase a home right now. Young adults can stay in the communities where they grew up. It's becoming harder. If you look at the demographic data for many of the city's neighborhoods, there's this drop in the 20 to 34 population. Some of it is just there's not really housing available for younger adults in the community. Seniors have more options for retirement, looking for opportunities to downsize from a single family home, maybe to a 1-story condo or an elevator building or so on. Workers can find homes close to their jobs, which actually kind of feeds the next bullet, which is that creates shorter commutes, which supports our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. We have some of the longest commutes in the region in Marin County. Due to the lack of affordable housing, and then just creating stronger and more complete communities when we have that balance, and we can have our teachers and our public safety officers living in the community where they're working. So why isn't the housing getting built? It's a complicated question, and I would imagine that many of you are familiar with some of the reasons. We have a much constrained supply of buildable land. In many places, we've run out of easy sites. There still are some fiscal benefits to the city of growing employment versus housing in terms of the tax burden to the city. The cost of land and construction is high and always getting higher. We have, in many cases, long project review requirements. The California Environmental Quality Act and standards in some communities can make it more expensive to build. And then finally, there's community resistance to development in many communities, and that may extend the period of hearings and also reduce the number of units and change the character of a project, make it less economical, and so on. So this kind of brings us to the next part of the presentation, where we're going to talk a little bit about what the housing element is. So it's basically the plan to address the factors that I've just described. And it's a required part of the San Rafael General Plan. It's been a required part of our general plan for more than 50 years, but it's unique among the elements of the general plan. For those of you who are familiar with the General Plan 2040, which was just adopted in August, it's updated every 15 to 20 years. The housing element has to be updated on a cycle that's set by the state of California every 8 years. It's the only part of the general plan that we have to submit to a state agency, and they certify it or they don't certify it, but we work to get it certified for a couple of reasons I'll go into in a future slide. The content of the element is very prescriptive. So we have some flexibility, but the state of California has an enormous checklist that they look at when they review your housing element, and they take it very literally. The element has to show that each city and county is doing their fair share to meet the region's housing needs. And that term fair share is something that we have got a couple of slides on to explain further. So within the housing element itself, there are these basic components. There's an evaluation of how we're doing in terms of meeting our current goals from the last element. There's a detailed needs assessment. There's an analysis of constraints in the city and an analysis of resources. And all of these together become the foundation for goals, policies, and actions. So underlying all of this is something called the RHNA, and the RHNA stands for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process. So this is a process that has been going on in the state for about 3 or 4 decades now. It starts at the state level. The state of California Housing and Community Development Department says each region of California needs a certain amount of housing over the next 8-year period to maintain that balance between supply and demand and meet the housing needs of all residents. And then it gives that number to the Council of Governments, which in our case in the Bay Area is ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. ABAG then takes that number and distributes it to each city and county in the region, and then each city basically gets an assignment and needs to show that they can accommodate their assignment in their housing element. So the regional number is 441,176 housing units, and that's basically from January 2023 through 2031. So that's about 2.5 times larger than what the assignment was for the last housing element period. So the question then becomes, well, how does ABAG take this gigantic number and distribute it across 101 cities and 9 counties? And this time around, they created a 37-member committee, which did include representatives from Marin County. At least one council member from Novato was on that committee, and a planner from San Anselmo. And that committee evaluated different options for how to evaluate or for how to distribute that RHNA number. What they ultimately came up with, you can sort of see this complicated looking box at the bottom right of the screen. They assigned the RHNA based on the population of each community and adjustments based on assigning more units, particularly more units for low and very low income households, to what they called high resource areas. These were communities with good schools, good parks, job opportunities, and so on. They also assigned more units to job centers and areas with public transportation. So most of Marin County is considered a high resource area. So Marin's numbers are much higher this time than they were last time. These are it's a comparison of the last round to the next round of those RHNA numbers. So you can see that many of the communities saw enormous percentage increases. The Corte Madeira's number went up by 900%. Larkspur's number went up by almost 650%, and so on. San Rafael's number went up by 220%, may be low percentage-wise, but in terms of the net number of units and the increase, it's actually the largest increase in the county in terms of the actual difference in the number of units that we need to plan for. So again, this is just data for San Rafael that we're looking at here. And what you're seeing is that our assignment went from 1,007 units in the last period to 3,220 units in this cycle. And about 40% of that total is for low and very low income households. So we need to, through our housing element, demonstrate that we have the capacity for 1,349 low and very low income units. So the big question people think about when they see this is what's a low and a very low income unit? What does that mean? And this, I think, provides some grounding for what that is, what we're talking about. These are the income thresholds for Marin County for households of different sizes. So just as an illustration here, if you are a 4-person household in Marin County and you are earning $146,000 a year, you are considered a low-income household. That's a pretty big number. The median income in Marin County is higher than that number. So the low income threshold in this, it's an affluent county. So this is a countywide statistic. It's not a city level statistic. But so for that household earning $146,000 a year, the housing element uses the federal standard that your affordable housing, your housing cost should not exceed 30% of your income, which in that case is $3,659 a month. So we're looking at housing of a variety of types. When we're talking about low and very low income housing, we may be talking about townhomes, we may be talking about condominiums, we may be talking about below market rate ownership homes for, in other words, single family homes. So it's a variety of home types. When we get to the very low income, the ability for the market to produce those units is much harder. Most apartments in San Rafael rent for more than $2,200 a month. So in some cases, there are subsidies that are required to make that pencil out. I just want to go over a couple of slides on where we are in the process. So we're in the middle of doing what's called the housing needs assessment. And this is where we look at all of the census data for San Rafael and we track how are we changing as a city? What are our demographic, what's the demographic data telling us about how our community is evolving and what does that mean for our housing needs? So we're looking at all of the things you see on the slide, for our households, for our special needs populations, and for the housing stock itself. So what kind of condition is our housing in, and what kind of units are we seeing? What kind of market trends are we seeing? There's a little factoid on the bottom left of this screen, just a kind of a fun, nerdy fact for those who are into data. Our population as of the 2020 census, this data is brand new. It was just released about a month ago. San Rafael now has 61,271 residents. And that's an increase of about 3,500 people since 2010, but we've only added 491 housing units during that 10-year period. So you kind of do the algebra of that. And what it means is we have more people per household now. We have more instances of overcrowding now. We have more instances of 2 families living in a single unit. So we're seeing those kinds of things to a greater extent than we used to. And that's one of the things the needs assessment is telling us. Okay, moving on to the site assessment. So I mentioned we need to demonstrate that we have the capacity for 3,200 units in the housing element. So there's some good news, which is that we do have capacity. The process is not going to require a lot of rezoning of property for cities like San Anselmo and Larkspur and Ross and Corte Madera. They're scrambling to figure out how they're going to accommodate numbers that they can't accommodate under their current zoning. We do have zoning in place through our new general plan and the downtown plan to accommodate just over 4,000 units. And that excludes anything beyond 200 units at Northgate Mall. So we're in a better position than most of the other cities in the county as far as having capacity to accommodate our housing needs. That said, we also face a number of challenges because state law has made it more difficult to count sites again. So if we counted a site in our last housing element, we can't just say, oh yeah, that site's still vacant, we can carry it forward. We have to actually do some extra analysis of the site to make sure that it's a viable development site and that it can be developed, and in some cases create an opportunity for streamlined approval for affordable projects on those same sites. So again, I can come back to any of these with more detail. There's also a rule that the state has adopted, Senate Bill 166, that says if one of our housing sites gets developed with, you know, a shopping center or an office building or a hotel or a use other than housing, we need to make up that site that we lost somewhere else in the city. So we have to have a buffer of capacity beyond that 3,200 units of about 20% or 30%, so that if we lose sites during the 8 years, we can still accommodate our need. ADUs are accessory dwelling units, and the good news is we can count accessory dwelling units primarily as moderate income housing. In some cases, we can count them as low income housing only if we have the data on their rents to show that accessory dwelling units are affordable to lower income households. So this is, I think, good news. We're seeing some really robust production of accessory dwelling units in the city, and that will accommodate a chunk of our need. Another new piece of legislation that I wanted to just touch on, and just quick time check, I have 8 more slides, so I'll go through them pretty quickly so we can do Q&A. The affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a new state law. It's kind of changed the game on housing elements, because what it's saying is that you can't just show us that you can meet your need. You need to show us that you're working proactively to overcome patterns of segregation in your community and to address barriers for lower income households and for other households that may have difficulty in the market. So non-English speaking households or disabled households and so on. So there's a fairly robust analysis that we need to do. This is just examples of, you know, what we're looking at, mostly data at the census tract level, looking at patterns of segregation in the community, loan approval denial by race, things like that, looking at various demographic variables and doing a thorough analysis of these patterns, and then coming up with programs that address the findings. So the question often comes up, what happens if we don't comply? What if we just ignore this requirement? What if we just adopt an element and the state says, no, you're not certified? It's not a good idea to not comply. In this case, the stakes are going up. Every cycle, they get higher. In this case, we lose our housing and transportation grants from numerous sources. The city would be vulnerable to lawsuits and financial penalties. The city of Huntington Beach, for example, was sued and faced a financial penalty for having an inadequate housing element. Loss of permitting authority, this is kind of extreme. If you're out of compliance, there is the potential that the state could come in and take your building permit authority away. I don't know that that's happened anywhere yet, but there are a variety of consequences to not having a certified element. So everyone is working to be certified. The other thing is there was a recent piece of legislation that allows the state to decertify you during the 8 years if you're not doing what you said you were going to do. So if you adopt an element that sounds great, but then you don't do anything, they may come in and say, you're now decertified and we want to see you redo your element. So a lot of good reasons to be certified. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is just that the state is also requiring, based on some legislation that passed in 2020, that we have to amend our safety element of the general plan concurrently to show evacuation routes and to identify all areas of the city that have less than 2 means of ingress and egress. In other words, if you're in a subdivision where there's only one road in and one road out, the same road, then we need to show that area on a map. And the expectation is that we're not going to be putting housing in, or, at least higher density housing or areas that, housing that's going to generate a lot of traffic in areas that have evacuation constraints, and so on. So last part of the presentation, just kind of quickly go over our public engagement process. We are now in fall 2021. I mentioned what we're working on, the needs and site assessments. We're going to be developing policies and programs in the winter months, and then moving to create a draft plan in the spring. There's a fairly long lead time to adopt the housing element because we actually have to submit a draft to the state before we adopt the element, and the state basically reviews it and tells us if we're on the right track and if we will be certified. If we're not on the right track, they give us comments and we need to make revisions before the Planning Commission holds public hearings and the City Council adopts the document. And all of that has to happen before January 2023. So it sounds like a long way away, but we need to be working on this pretty steadily from now until then. So engagement is a critical part of the process. It's always a critical part of any planning process, but it's actually legally mandated in this case that we reach out to folks who don't usually participate in planning processes. So we have a focused effort in this process on reaching out to tenants and non-English speaking households and others with special needs. We welcome any input from the Federation on the best way we can do this, and thoughts and ideas you have about how we can reach more people. We also need to create different ways to get involved. We can't just do Zoom meetings. We have to actually provide multiple ways for the community to be engaged in this. Some of what we're doing now, we have the council authorized a 13-member working group that's been created to provide some guidance on the process. That group has been formed, but we have not yet had our first meeting. We expect that'll happen in November. There will be community workshops, and I've got another slide coming up on that. Focus group meetings with different organizations and people in the community. Presentations like this one to civic organizations, and we are available to speak to your HOA or neighborhood group about this, as we did with the general plan. We have a Spanish language engagement program that we're doing in collaboration with the Canal Alliance. We have a project website, which is sanrafaelhousing.org, and we'll be doing progress reports and public hearings with the Commission and Planning Commission and City Council. At the beginning of this presentation, Amy mentioned that you guys were having a workshop or something on Wednesday, November 3rd, and that I thought, wow, I'm really glad we changed the date of our first workshop, because it was Wednesday, November 3rd until yesterday. And now it's Thursday, November 4th. And we didn't know about the other meeting. So our meeting is Thursday, November 4th. So if you want to go to 2 in a row, we welcome you to come to a community conversation about housing in San Rafael. That's going to be a Zoom meeting, and we'll be providing the details on the website within the next week or so. We're beginning the process of doing publicity for that meeting. It'll be in English and Spanish simultaneously. And again, it's an introductory meeting. We expect to do more meetings like that over the next 8 months or so. That's the final slide. Thank you for bearing with me. It's a lot of information, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Barry. Really, thanks so much. Obviously, this is it's not even the beginning, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. And what I'm going to do at this point in time, if it's okay with you, Richard, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you if you want to call on anyone who has a question or just moderate. And as far as I'm concerned, people could just ask a question, and you want to, as we say in French, céder le passage. You want to let, if two people want to talk at the same time, one of you give way. and then Richard will moderate and follow up if that's okay.
Yeah, I actually would prefer the, if you have a question, just speak up. I'm not able to switch screens on this little iPad that I'm on tonight. My wife also has a meeting. I lost the flip of the coin. She has the laptop and I have the iPad. So let me lead off, Barry, by first thanking you for your presentation. I think it's well done, and it certainly shows what the city is doing in terms of encouraging investigating and encouraging ways to determine the need for housing. My question is, it seems that the ultimate solution of creating these needed units comes from the private sector. I mean, the city's not going to build thousands of units. The private sector, developers, individual builders need to step in and do the work to create the units. The financial institutions, which are also in the private sector, need to decide how they are going to finance both the construction and the purchase of these units, in encouraging, maybe lower income or previously less qualified individuals to then qualify. So what effect can the city have on the private sector to encourage them to create these units?
Thank you for asking that very important question. And it also brings up one of the major points here, which is, as you said, the city doesn't build the units. The city is responsible for designating the sites and putting the zoning in place that allows the private sector to build the units. So what we do through this process is we reach out to both the for-profit and nonprofit development community and ask them the question that you just asked, and basically say to them, what are the obstacles that you're facing, and what can the city do to remove those obstacles or to help you overcome those obstacles? Some of it is beyond the city's control. Some of it is financing, and it's really, it's, if we can help, we will, but we can't always, we can't ensure that 3,200 units of housing will get built. And I cynically will say that I don't think 3,200 units of housing will get built, but it's creating the opportunity to build that doesn't exist in many communities, and then putting those programs in place that we're working on through this process. And I'm going to ask, actually, Jake or Alexis, if you guys want to chime in on any of these questions, because that's it's a really good question and one that's been a problem in the past.
Sure, I would like to say a few things, because as it is true, the city is not obligated to build the units, and the city would not be the ones to specifically build the units. The city would be a partner in the units, and the city would be developing financing or going out and supporting and encouraging that. And one of the ways that we could do that is through utilizing state and federal tax credits, coupled with local contributions, where we can actually, with a local contribution of a certain dollar amount, we could foreseeably pull in 7-8 times that dollar amount into a project from the state, from the federal tax credit programs, thereby allowing us to achieve the units. This is how units how affordable housing is built in other communities. And looking back in our records, it looks like we, in fact, haven't utilized the state tax credit program since 2007. So we've gone 15 years without really taking advantage of a program that's out there and available to us to bring resources, financial resources from outside of Marin County to achieve our housing. So these are some of the ways that the city would be working with nonprofit developers and the for-profit developers to achieve the units using all resources that we have at our disposal.
Okay, sounds good. Other questions? Go ahead. You're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, this is Grace Garrity. You know, Barry, there's a lot of projects that have been stalled for a long time. I mean, they've gotten approval. So what do you do in that case?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the an easy answer for what we do with our stalled projects, other than working with the applicant to see if we can get them moving. So, well, are you thinking about a particular project? I think some of it is depending on which project.
Well, I haven't gone through the list recently that, the city has up there, but there were several that haven't been updated and nothing has happened close to home. But, I don't just want to be, North San Rafael centric. We have, the property there for 1050 by the Sheridan.
Mhm.
That was approved for over 150 units, apartment buildings, and it was approved for both low income and seniors, and nothing has happened. There was a lawsuit. The lawsuit got settled over a year ago, and still nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of question that we're presenting to the development community and asking them. I mean, what I hear anecdotally is it's construction costs and labor costs, and in that case, a project where they had originally proposed a much larger number of units that was reduced, that made it maybe less economical. It is going to depend on the project, but it's an interesting observation, because we're seeing that on almost all of the projects that have been approved since while we did the general plan. I keep waiting for, when is this going to come out of the ground?
Right.
So it's an interesting dilemma.
Well,
Right.
maybe,
And
Jacob, that's something that that you can look into and make sure that you start developing a relationship with these developers and see what the devil's going on, because they were supposedly all shovel ready, and the community, all that was passed. I mean, so
yeah.
the sooner the
And
better. I'll
I
unmute.
have, that's one thing that I have on my to-do list, Grace, is to reach out to all of the developers on projects that have affordable units in them to find out what the challenges are, what's holding the project, and see how we can help support that project. If it's connecting them with other resources, for instance, with nonprofits that could help them in partnership to achieve the units using, as I mentioned, these outside resources from the state and the federal government, or if there's other ways that the city can be involved to help move those projects along. I'd like to find out what it is and help get those projects, especially the ones that are shovel ready. Let's get those built.
So Barry, you said in a comment when you answered my question, you don't think that the target 3,000 some units is going to get built in the time frame suggested. So I sort of have a two-part question. You alluded to it in your slides, but what happens when they don't get built? You said that there are various remedies that can be enacted, some of which have never been, which could be. So the first part of my question is, what happens if they don't get built? The second part is that it seems that the numbers that have been set for certainly Marin County cities, but I'm imagining in the governor's action in signing this bill saying X number of units have to be built. It seems that these numbers are probably going to be pretty aggressive statewide, or at least countywide. And it would seem that that the efforts that Jake is going to make in contacting developers and finding out what can be done to get them to build here is likely to become competitive, quite more competitive among cities, among towns, trying to attract developers to come in and do the development in my town so I can reach my goal. Do you see this yet, or do you see it possibly happening in the near future?
Yeah, I do. I mean, just to go to the second part first, I do think it's going to be more competitive. It really depends on how much money is available at the state level. We've seen more recently than we had in the past. So there's more to go around, but there are also, as you say, there's more competition. The reason I said that about the number being high is that that's just physically to build that much housing in 8 years is, it would be really difficult to do that. And we haven't seen that kind of construction in this county in more than 5 decades. It's the general plan looked 20 years into the future and said we're going to add roughly 4,000 units in 20 years. This plan says we're going to get 75% of the way there in the first 8 years. So that, to me, it doesn't really add up. And our projections were based on some pretty good demographic data. Looking at, again, 400 units a year times 8 years. We barely built 400 units in the last 10 years. So just mechanically, logistically, it's a stretch. I think your question about what happens if we don't build the units, it's really more what happens if we don't do the things we said in our housing element to facilitate the development of those units. If the units aren't getting built, to some extent that's out of our control, but the things that we can control, are we denying projects? Are we keeping standards that are too difficult for development to meet? Are there things that, that we're not doing that we said we were going to do that are causing the absence of construction? And that's when I think, there are consequences.
Barry,
Okay.
may I ask a question?
Sure.
Could you explain the job that the work group will have, the community work group will have?
Yeah, it's a lighter version of what the General Plan Steering Committee did. The work group will be meeting roughly once a month for about 6 months. And part of their task is to review some of the draft policies and programs that we're developing and provide some guidance to us as to whether we're moving in the right direction or where many of the folks on the working group are housing professionals. So we have a developer, we have a nonprofit developer, we have a homeless advocacy organization, we have others who have knowledge and experience in housing, and we're hoping to draw from that experience and knowledge in a collaborative way on a Zoom screen and maybe in a real room at some point to talk through some of our policies and programs and get some feedback and get some thoughts. It's really a way to generate ideas and get feedback about what the city can do. And Amy, since you mentioned it, I do want to mention those meetings are going to be open to the public. They're not locked meetings, so to speak. They're meetings that'll be on Zoom, where they'll be in webinar format. So there'll be an attendees and a panelists area, and attendees will have an opportunity to comment and speak at those meetings. So you're all welcome to participate once those meetings start.
In the final analysis, once members of that committee sift through the different policies, and then you're suggesting that they will be making recommendations. Is that right?
They may make recommendations on certain policies or programs. They're making recommendations to staff, basically, and it's not, and it is not that they're charged with developing the plan that is then presented to the city council. That's not really the intent in this case. It's really more of a vetting body or a sounding board.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Okay, Amy.
No, it's Terry Hughes.
Great.
You mentioned as one of the requirements that that the housing have at least 2 exit ways or ingress, egress, whatever. Is that only, I mean, I'm just sort of curious about that we're making that a requirement for new housing, and I applaud it. I'm just wondering what it means to places that already exist, like the canal, that don't even have that.
It's an interesting question. It's more for fire prevention. So what we're looking at in this case is only areas that are designated high fire hazard severity areas, or the urban wildlife, sorry, I say urban wildlife interface, it's urban wildfire interface. So the canal actually wouldn't be subject to that analysis. It's got other issues related to sea level rise that we will be looking at. And that's a kind of a separate issue. And that's something we looked at in the general plan. But the specific state requirement to look at the ingress and egress is for what we call our WUI areas, those wild land urban interface areas. And it's really to avoid putting more vulnerable development in fire hazard areas.
That makes sense.
Anyone else?
Any baseball score updates?
That's a good question.
Still
As
nothing.
far as
nothing.
Okay.
and it's the top of the sixth.
Okay, well, unless there are any other questions that we have, we could close this up. Anyone else? No?
If I could, I'd like to if I could just take a moment. I wanted to just relay the idea and the concept here about the housing and units and achieving our numbers and achieving our housing. It's important in this process that we remember and we recognize that we're also looking at this in terms of the needs in the community. And it goes beyond just housing and a set of keys and a place to live, but it's the assurance that we can continue to live independently as our lifestyles change, as we grow older. And so we're also going to be exploring other aspects around housing that's not just the physicality of the units itself, but it's helping support and maintain community so that people can continue to live in the community that they wish.
Okay. Awesome. So we are going to share this with our membership, and we thank the three of you for having come to explain what lies ahead. Really great. So thanks again, Barry. And
Thank you.
You're welcome, and Alexis and Jacob, and we wish you well.